Now, welcome back to part 2 of our exploration on DDT. And before we go any further, I would like to play a little bit of this particular video I just referenced in part A on delousing stations. Here you can see military type men creating lines where civilians, not soldiers, where civilians would line up to be spread with DDT. Infants, as you can see, older women, nurses, children, on their hair, in their face, in their eyes, down their shirts, and up their pants and dresses. Now, I don't know about you, but when I see those images today, all that we know about the use of pesticide, how many have actually been banned, and the warning signs and labels on the different products we do use in our homes, it's pretty shocking to see. I would imagine you would agree. But the role of DDT during wartime did not just stop in that period of history. Because of the great success of DDT and because of the government's desire to create the most safe, comfortable environments for its citizens during the 1950s and 60s, they began to advertise the value of DDT in everyday life. So they began to do what we call pesticide aerial kind of spray overs. And so it no longer was just a target of wartime, but it was about eradicating all forms of insects in North America society and environments. So they would spray DDT on agricultural crops. They would spray DDT over our forests, over our mountains, and basically any public space that was considered to have insects, and insects of all kinds, and areas that actually hadn't been identified as potential places where there had been any particular outbreaks in North America of typhus or malaria. And it didn't just stop there. They also were spraying over farmland and farmland animals. And you can see in this picture here, these are sheeps. But on this picture here, I know it's not as great, but if you look closely here, they were actually spraying inside of barns. And this is a barn that was holding cows. The numbers, the amount of DDT that was used up until 1970, and we can say 1970 because you're going to hear that in terms of what would unfold eventually. But from 45 to 70, the environment was also focusing on killing mosquitoes and flies. And then everyday companies that have been actually producing different containers or ways in which to spread insecticides were also getting into the action. So a company named Sherwin-Williams, maybe some of you have heard that, they actually started to put it in paint, in different hand sprays, so that it could be used every day in our own environments. And the advertisement that also aligned with this new goal was unbelievable, really. No flies on me, thanks to DDT. And you can see here a young child. And I'm just going to show you some pictures and images, but do make sure you read chapter 7. Here is a truck, and you can see the huge tank of DDT, and they're simply going along beaches. Here's somebody in a bathing suit, and they're spreading DDT in kind of this foggy, misty substance. Over here you have an ad which would have appeared in local newspapers and magazines promoting the idea of killing insects and bugs. There's a few things in this particular slide. You have kind of an actual example of what it looked like when it was being spread out, kids running on the street. But this too is another way in which our environment was filled up with DDT, that they were even going into kind of clear water, clean water, fresh water, what we would call, and deliberately focusing on those areas. So in time, DDT was everywhere. It was in our air, on our soil, in our soil, and in all our various waters and waterways. Here's a more blown up picture for you. If that wasn't enough, take a look at these videos. They sprayed it in pools, people swimming, and they sprayed it on the streets as children were walking home. Here's some kids, as you can see here, kids eating, having their lunch, DDT being basically thrown around. Sometime later in the 60s, they did ask the public to go inside their homes when they did flyovers, but this certainly wasn't the way things were done for most of the time when DDT was being used. And then, of course, came the handy-dandy small containers so that every one of us could get into the action. Kids could have a part in it. Housewives could spray their windows. And again, the advertisement to support this was really unbelievable. And Sherwin-Williams was, in fact, one of the biggest companies, and I'll move this down, you can see, to produce DDT in a way, in containers, to actually disperse it everywhere one would want. So what does this toxic legacy of DDT look like today? Well, first off, you have to appreciate that when a society is told over and over how important something is for them, and that people who are going outside and maybe they're not being confronted with mosquitoes, black flies, or for that matter, other friendly insects in the garden, in the trees, in our environment, in our forests, in our camps. People get used to that type of kind of environment. So it's not really surprising that when knowledge became available, people were really hard-pressed to believe that DDT could actually cause any problems. And remember, this whole availability of a pesticide in a can had never been available before. So it was a new thing. But regrettably, which is often the case, facts, research was available. And by 1949, now think about that, it had already been revealed that 87% of the flies were already resistant to DDT, which meant this poison that was being produced and then put into our environment was actually not doing what it intended to do. And then by 1950, just think about that, when the companies producing it were working quite hard to make sure that it was promoted through advertisements, that it was easily available, easy to use, that they already knew that 100% of house and barn flies were also resistant. But they kept pumping it out. They kept promoting it as an important product to use. And so now, here comes the other interesting point. The regulation during this time period in the United States of insecticides was the responsibility of the Department of Agriculture, which was also one of DDT's greatest benefactors. And so soon now, in time, research would be done. And one of the groups that they realized was the exposure of pregnant women to DDT. So those women who had been pregnant during the time they were exposed, and first of all, the outcome was that they had a 4-fold increase of risk of developing breast cancer by the age of 52. And this content is available to you. National Geographic even did a story on it in 2015. And of course, there's been countless other research articles published about the results of DDT. But for our course specifically, we are going to look at one person. And because we are looking at what came of this, what came of the use of DDT. And so we will turn now our attention to what many believe to be one of the finest nature writers of the 20th century. And interestingly, not only one of the greatest nature writers, but one of our greatest environmental advocates, and often cited as the person who began the environmental movement of the 1970s. And so I ask you then to move to the next videos available to you regarding Rachel Carson.